Most people grieve the loss of a loved one with tears, prayers, or silence. Mariya Oktyabrskaya chose to grieve with 26 tons of hardened steel and a 76mm cannon. In 1941, life as Mariya knew it came to a violent, screeching halt. She was living a relatively comfortable life in Siberia, far from the front lines, when a telegram arrived that turned her world to ash. Her husband, Ilya, a regimental commissar in the Red Army, had been killed in action fighting the Germans near Kiev. For 2 years she had waited for news, hoping against hope, but the telegram confirmed her worst nightmare. But Mariya didn't collapse into a heap of despair. She didn't fade away into widowhood. Instead, a cold, hard rage began to crystallize in her chest. She realized that crying wouldn't bring Ilya back, but killing the men who killed him might make the pain bearable. She decided right then and there that she wasn't just going to support the war effort. She was going to become the war effort. She looked around her house, at her furniture, her jewelry, and her savings, and she saw them not as memories, but as ammunition. Mariya began selling literally everything she owned. She sold her silverware, her clothes, her family heirlooms. She worked endless hours, scraping together every single ruble she could find. Her neighbors thought she had gone insane with grief, hoarding cash like a madwoman. But she had a very specific price tag in mind, 50,000 rubles. That was the cost of a T-34 medium tank. It sounds absurd today, the idea of a private citizen walking into a factory to buy a tank like it was a used car, but Mariya was operating on a level of determination that bypassed logic entirely. She didn't want to donate the money. She wanted to own the weapon. Once she had the cash, she did something even more audacious. She wrote a letter directly to Joseph Stalin. In it, she didn't beg. She negotiated. She wrote, "My husband was killed in action, defending the motherland. I want revenge on the fascist dogs for his death and for the death of Soviet people. For this purpose I have deposited all my personal savings, 50,000 rubles, to the National Bank in order to build a tank. I request that the tank be named Fighting Girlfriend and that I be allowed to drive it to the front lines." It was a suicide mission masked as a donation. She was 38 years old, ancient for a tank recruit, and she was a woman in a male-dominated army. But she had the money, and more importantly, she had the fury. Stalin, recognizing a gold mine of propaganda when he saw one, approved the request immediately. The Kremlin knew that the image of a grieving widow buying a tank to avenge her husband would inspire the entire nation. But Mariya wasn't interested in being a poster girl. When the army tried to give her a ceremonial role, she snapped back. She demanded full training. She went to the Omsk tank school for 5 months, learning not just how to drive, but how to fix the engine, load the shells, and operate the radio. She was surrounded by 18-year-old boys who snickered at the crazy old lady, but she outworked every single one of them. She learned to handle the heavy, greasy controls of the T-34 until her hands were calloused and stained permanently black with oil. Finally, in 1943, her chariot arrived. It was a brand new T-34, smelling of fresh paint and diesel. On the side of the turret, in bold white Cyrillic letters, she painted the name she had promised, Boyevaya Podruga, which translates to fighting girlfriend. It was a name that sounded cute, almost affectionate, but was actually a grim promise to her dead husband. She was the girlfriend, and the fighting was all she had left. She climbed into the driver's seat, the claustrophobic heart of the beast, and rolled out toward the Western Front with the 26th Guards Tank Brigade. The soldiers laughed when they saw her. They thought it was a publicity stunt. They had no idea that they were looking at the Soviet version of the Angel of Death. Her first taste of blood came at the Battle of Smolensk in October 1943. The commanders were hesitant to send her into the thick of it, fearing she would panic. They were wrong. When the order to attack came, Mariya didn't hang back. She slammed the tank into gear and charged. She maneuvered the fighting girlfriend with a level of aggression that stunned her crew. She smashed through German anti-tank gun positions, crushing the artillery under her treads. She destroyed machine gun nests that were pinning down the infantry. For the first time, the rage that had been burning inside her for 2 years was released through the throttle and the trigger. She wasn't driving. She was hunting. During that first engagement, her tank was hit. A shell damaged the tracks, leaving the fighting girlfriend immobilized in no man's land under heavy fire. Standard procedure would be to bail out and retreat. Mariya ignored standard procedure. Despite orders to stay inside, she grabbed a wrench, popped the hatch, and jumped out of the tank in the middle of a firefight. With bullets pinging off the armor around her, she fixed the track herself, screaming orders at her crew to cover her. She repaired the damage, climbed back in, and continued the assault. By the time the battle ended, nobody was laughing anymore. She was promoted to sergeant on the spot. The men in her unit stopped seeing her as a woman or a widow. She was just Mom, the terrifyingly competent driver of the best tank in the battalion. She wrote letters to her sister describing the satisfaction of the combat. "I've had my baptism by fire," she wrote. "I beat the bastards. Sometimes I'm so angry I can't even breathe." This wasn't patriotism in the abstract sense. This was personal. Every German soldier she saw was the man who killed Ilya. Every shell her tank fired was a message to the afterlife. She drove the tank like she possessed it, pushing the engine to its limits, often leading the charge when younger men hesitated. Then came the night raid at Novoye Selo in November. The darkness was thick and the mud was deep. Mariya navigated the treacherous terrain, flanking the German positions. She crushed an artillery piece and killed dozens of enemy soldiers. But again the fighting girlfriend took a hit to the tracks. And again Mariya, possessed by that reckless courage that comes from having nothing left to lose, jumped out to fix it. This time she wasn't just under small arms fire. Artillery was raining down. She fixed the track, but the image of this small woman wrestling with massive steel links while the world exploded around her became legendary among the troops. She was unkillable, or so they thought. The end of her crusade began in January 1944, near the village of Zhidi. The battle was brutal. Mariya drove the tank into the German trenches, physically crushing 2 trenches and 3 machine gun nests. She was unstoppable until a German anti-tank shell slammed into the tracks, severing them completely. For the 3rd time, Mariya grabbed her tools and leaped out. She was fixing the track, hammering the pin back in place, when a mortar shell exploded nearby. Shrapnel tore through the air and struck her in the head. She collapsed into the snow, the blood from her wound mixing with the oil on her hands. She was evacuated to a field hospital in Kiev, the same region where her husband had died years earlier. It was a poetic, tragic circle. She lingered in a coma for 2 months. The army, realizing they were losing a national icon, flew in the best doctors from Moscow, but the damage was too severe. On March 15, 1944, Mariya Oktyabrskaya died. She never woke up to see the final victory, but she had fulfilled her vow. She had bought her tank, she had driven it to the front, and she had personally sent hundreds of Nazis to hell before she joined her husband. The tank fighting girlfriend didn't die with her. Her crew, devastated by the loss of their mom, swore to keep the tank running in her memory. Even when the original tank was eventually destroyed in battle, the unit painted fighting girlfriend on a second tank and then a third. The name traveled all the way to Berlin. Mariya's spirit effectively led the charge into the heart of the Reich. In August 1944, she was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor the state could bestow. It was the ultimate acknowledgement that the widow from Siberia had become a warrior of legend. Mariya's story stands out because it is the ultimate manifestation of female rage. History often paints women in war as victims, nurses, or waiting wives. Mariya refused all those roles. She monetized her grief and turned it into violence. She showed the world that a woman's love for her husband is not a passive, gentle thing. It can be a weapon of mass destruction. She didn't buy a tank to protect herself. She bought it to hunt. She is a reminder that there is no force on earth more dangerous than a person who has lost everything and decides to take it out on the people responsible. Today in the city of Tomsk, there is a monument to Mariya. But the real monument is the story itself. It sounds like the plot of a Tarantino movie, a revenge fantasy that is too cool to be true. But it is true. Somewhere in the frozen mud of the Eastern Front, a middle-aged woman named Mariya drove a tank she paid for with her own savings, screaming her husband's name over the roar of the engine, proving that while money can't buy happiness, it can definitely buy a T-34 and a chance to get even. So the next time you hear a story about the great men of World War II, remember the widow. Remember the woman who didn't write a poem or light a candle. Remember the woman who sold her silverware, bought a warmachine, and drove it straight down the throat of the Third Reich because she simply missed her husband. It is a love story, yes, but it is written in diesel, steel, and blood.